Okay, welcome to another episode of Mr. K is Wrong, where I look at somebody that I knew in, my high school days who posts on Facebook these ridiculous right-wing memes, and I debunk them, you know, because he's stupid. I used to have more respect for him when I was in high school, but, he's gone so far down a right-wing rabbit hole that it's just ridiculous. And I feel like I really need to debunk some of his nonsense because it's really a lot of common arguments that he makes on his Facebook page. So today I'm going to debunk a right wing fear mongering meme posted by Mr. K involving body modification. And I'll emphasize how this isn't really an issue most people should be concerned about because, well, for starters, it involves individual human freedom to do what they want with their lives and with their bodies. So Mr. K posted on Facebook a sort of meme or image, and it involves somebody who has body modified over the years. And Mr. K said, mental illness is a terrible thing for families to deal with, you know, meaning to finger wag against this person, as if what they do is, any real significant issue for anybody else's life. So the post has an image of someone who over the years modified their bodies to appear more like a dragon. So, people out there might find that strange or quirky or whatever. If I was going to dismiss it, I would say, oh, maybe it's somebody who, is modifying their body, their physical appearance to look more interesting than they actually are, or something like that. That's a common critique of people who get tattoos or piercings or any number of things, procedures, maybe plastic surgery, whatever. And, I can see some legitimacy to that critique, but there's also legitimacy to the opposite view where instead of wanting to look mundane and like everybody else, a person said, you know what? I'm going to alter my physical appearance in a way that I think represents myself, more truly to the world. And, I'm going to find myself to be more interesting as a result. And, some people prefer tattoos and piercings and all kinds of different things, that's their choice, their freedom to do so. So anyway, the post that Mr. K shared, and it has this following text. It says, "This story is actually heartbreaking. Tiamat Legion Medusa is a renowned artist and performer known for undergoing extensive body modifications to transform into a dragon. Born male, Tiamat identifies as a trans woman and has also transitioned from human to reptile, adopting the pronouns it or its, and considering itself interspecies. This transformation is deeply personal and symbolic, reflecting Tiamat's experiences with trauma, including childhood abandonment and abuse. Tiamat was abandoned in the desert as a child, where western diamondback rattlesnakes became symbolic parental figures. This experience, combined with later traumas, led Tiamat to reject human identity. Tiamat's modifications include the removal of ears and nostrils, green eye staining, implanted horns, and tattooed scales modeled after the western diamondback rattlesnake. These changes are part of a ritualistic process to escape the confines of the human body. So that's the end of the quote. So you people out there, you might think, oh, that's strange or whatever, and you're entitled to your opinion. But at the end of the day, I could laugh at it too, but who cares? I'm not really negatively impacted by it. In fact, it's somebody out there who has a story to tell, right? So this kind of post is a textbook example of right wing fear mongering, taking an admittedly unusual but ultimately harmless case and using it to stoke some outrage. So let's look at it. So first of all, this should be said and really emphasized. This impacts or affects almost no one. The idea that society is being overrun by people modifying their bodies to resemble mythical creatures is absurd. Tiamat Legion Medusa is a single person, not a movement, and their choices don't impact the vast majority of people in any way. And even if it was more of a movement, you know, so long as it's people freely choosing to do what they want with their own bodies, it doesn't really matter. So treating this as some widespread crisis is just another way to distract from real issues, you know? And, the emphasis in the post was, oh, it's a mental illness and it's doing damage to this person's family or whatever. Well, for one thing, it's like they didn't even read the actual text that was provided because that person was apparently abandoned by their family anyway, according to the very meme that they posted about, you know, the I guess dragon person or whatever you want to call it. The chosen pronoun is it, right? So that's not really an offensive thing to say, at least if the post itself is accurate. So I mean, where does that leave us? Like the the fact is, Mr. K apparently doesn't even understand that one of the very points made in the post, which is that the family of the dragon is no is no longer really that relevant anyway. So they chose to modify their appearance, if anything, to distance themselves from family members that abandoned them. So the only known official instance of cat litter being placed in the school classroom, you know, it's really like that. The remember that fear mongering that Joe Rogan did, among others, claiming that kitty litters were being used all over these schools. But the only known instance of that happening was um, in the late 2010s by the Jefferson County Public School District in Colorado. Some teachers were given what were called go buckets that contained cat litter to be used as a toilet in an emergency lockdown situation, such as during a school shooting. So that was another thing that people were panicked about. Remember, they were claiming that, oh, these kids in these schools, they're identifying as cats and they're giving these litter boxes. Well, that wasn't really happening, especially not on any major scale. And I always had this controversial opinion. I was saying, well, who even cares? If people are identifying as cats and using cat litter boxes, I kind of don't care about that. It doesn't it doesn't really affect me now if a school is forcing a kid or an adult to use a litter box, that would be a different story altogether. But if this outright lie was actually happening, it would actually be of little consequence. But Joe Rogan was eventually expected to walk back his claim, and thankfully he actually did because it was BS from the start. And that was one of the signs that Joe Rogan was really becoming a stupid person. And ironically, Joe Rogan is himself an example of somebody who has, in a way, modified his body by going to the gym a lot. And people like Joe Rogan, they get steroids and whatnot. I'm not saying Joe Rogan has used steroids. For all I know, he hasn't. But there are a lot of bodybuilders who get body modifications, and we don't treat that as a national crisis. At least, typically not. So a person might similarly judge somebody who hits the gym all the time as trying to overcompensate for something that they're lacking in their lives. Like they're trying to be tough and macho and might show signs of insecurity or whatever. You can dissect all kinds of things like that. You could also do the opposite and make fun of people who never go to the gym. Like I've I've got a gut myself. I'm not in the best shape. People obviously make fun of that, or they could, you know. It's a it's always something you can do. You can always make fun of somebody's physical appearance, or anything they do to alter their appearance, like their haircuts, or if they dye their hair, a certain color like pink or purple. But at the end of the day, like it doesn't really matter. You know, uh, haircut's not a lifestyle, as the punk rocker Jello Biafra said in one of his songs. And as sort of evidence of that, I know somebody who worked at a place that I used to work, who was a former Walmart manager, and she was in her 60s. And she at one point had her hair dyed purple. And she listened to country music and she was religious and whatnot. But she was like, you know what? I'm going to dye my hair purple. And, I could have judged her for that. But what's the point? It was just her choosing to change her hairstyle or whatever. So, there's another similar lie that Trump frequently perpetuated. It was the claim that schools are secretly sending children for gender affirming surgeries. So that was a lie. He made it seem like the doctors were there in the schools themselves. Surgeons were actually in the schools performing on the students or whatever. It was an outright lie. And another lie that was going on was that there were surgeries being performed on students without parents' permission. That wasn't really something that was going on. As there were no rogue doctors going around kidnapping kids to do surgeries on them. And it was all about this fear that transgender people are destroying the country or something. Claiming that the collapse of civilization was happening because transgender people exist or whatever. But you know what? On that note, I've got another controversial take, and I don't really see this often. But you know what? If a child and their parents and their doctor all agree to graft antlers onto a child's head so they could look like a deer or something like that, I don't really care. It's still not any of my business. Freedom means letting people make their own choices. If you've got all these different people agreeing, that that a child or whatever can have their body modified, it doesn't really matter to me. That's one of the things that can happen in a free society. If a parent and a child agree that a child should be able to get a tattoo, I don't really care. It might be something that's frowned upon by some, but it doesn't really matter. You know, at least not to me. So I believe in actual freedom like that. And the Republicans often say that, oh, we're the party of individual freedom. Well, they're not. Freedom means letting people make their own choices again. So conservatives often claim to care about individual liberty. I said liberty, liberty. But when someone makes a personal decision that they don't like, suddenly it's a mental illness crisis rather than a personal expression thing. And if somebody wants to alter their body, whether through tattoos, piercings, or yes, gender affirming care, or something admittedly more extreme, that's really their choice. Nobody's making you do these things. And if somebody was, well, then you know what? I would actually be on the side of those who would oppose being forced to make such modifications. But the government or random Facebook commentators don't get to decide how others live their lives. That's one of the things about living in an actual free society. So another point about this is that trauma and healing look different for everyone. So, assuming that the Facebook post has accurate information, Tiamat's story is then deeply personal and shaped by actual trauma, just like many people's paths towards self acceptance. Conservatives often push the pull yourself up by your bootstraps rhetoric, but they balk when somebody actually takes control of their identity in a way that they don't understand. So if Tiamat finds peace in these transformations, then why should anybody else care? You know, the conservatives out there or the right wingers, they ultimately make decisions that not everybody would approve of. Like they're like let's say they even just drink a cup of coffee or something like that. Well, there are people who you know don't drink coffee. Maybe they eat meat. Well, there are people who don't eat meat. There are individual choices you can make, and there's there's a line in the sand that you can sort of draw for yourself and sometimes for others, but there's always going to be disagreement about where you draw the line. So there's a lot of hypocrisy of such outrage. People who get upset over this usually have no problem with extreme body modifications in other contexts, like again, bodybuilders using steroids or people getting plastic surgery, or even religious practices like scarification. I'm sure there are you know people out there who claim to be conservative who are in favor of things like corporal punishment, and that's literally a teacher or somebody like that, slapping, maybe even outright beating up a student. That seems to me like a worse thing to do than you know it, any voluntary personal choice that somebody would make over their own bodies. So the outrage is selective and just another way to punch down at people. So at the end of the day, Tiamat's choices don't impact the lives of people sharing the meme. If conservatives truly cared about freedom, they'd stop using rare and extreme cases to justify control over others' bodies. And you know what? They would actually respect and maybe admire such people because they're in some ways actually representing human freedom as it actually occurs out in the wild, you might say. And, I guess that's a fitting analogy in this case because the person in question is identifying as a wild creature, non human. And I don't fully, I don't fully understand that. I don't fully, understand or agree with such a choice uh, that I would make for myself. I'm not ever going to undergo procedures like that. I mean, I don't even have tattoos or piercings. But at the end of the day, when I see posts like this, it kind of makes me, you know, maybe want to get tattoos or piercings just as sort of a middle finger to close minded morons.